Hello everyone. So it'll be a while before I get back to my highlights. So today would be, um, I think, the last one for at least 2 weeks. Let's see if I can manage to make a video in between, but I don't really think that will be possible. So realistically, my next video should be in the end of Jan. But let's get started with today's highlights. First one is from getting things done. In training and coaching many thousands of people, I have found that lack of time is not the major issue for them, though they may think it is. The real problem is a lack of clarity and definition about what a project really is and what associated next action steps are required. It's pretty self-evident. I don't really think we have talked about breaking down the project into the first action item. That's how that is important. It reiterates that. So it's not about time management, it's about priority management. We hear that often, right? And this is, I think, it spells out even further. It's not really about the time. That's not the issue. The issue is understanding what a project is, understanding the first action item. And if we understand that, if we prioritize for that rather than finding time, we'll never find time. Time is not that kind of a construct that you find time hidden somewhere. Anyway, so it's like I said, it's self evident. Let's keep going. Pirates in the Navy. This path must begin at the lowest levels inside the company, move through middle management and all the way to the C suite. If there is no leadership presence for innovation at the top level, then it will be hard to sustain it long term within the company. So, Pirates in the Navy is a book about building an innovation culture within a company, and it is written for very large organizations where everything happens by structure. In a smaller organization, innovation happens organically. It's much easier for things to innovation to happen, and it like kind of blossoms up all the way throughout the organization. It's much more easier. In a large organization, I mean, it's no different. Innovation happens at grassroots level, but before it can blossom up everywhere, the structure kills it, and that is why this book deals with why structure is important. Like the highlight says, if there's no leadership presence for innovation, it'll the grassroots idea will die at that level. They will never be able to sustain themselves throughout the organization. So yeah, it'll be hard to sustain it long term within the company. The scope of impact may be very, very low. So yeah, let's move on. 7.5 lessons about the brain. Degeneracy in the brain means that your actions and experiences can be created in multiple ways. Each time you feel afraid, for example, your brain may construct that feeling with various set of neurons. So I'm not really an expert in brain structure, brain science, and everything, right? And neuroscience. So I can't really give a very educated point of view over here. I can only share my understanding. And degeneracy, it kind of in this highlight, it mirrors a lot with plasticity. Um, and like the highlight says, each time you feel afraid, your brain may construct the feeling with different set of neurons. It's not the same set of neurons that activate all the time, and degeneracy is kind of responsible for that. And plasticity, I feel, is the flip side of that. As in, any neuron can be repurposed for any purpose. It happens because of the same phenomenon. This happens. Well, let's move on. Remote, not distant. Asynchronous communication requires more intentionality and effort. Your team needs to become obsessive about documentation, which can slow down communication sometimes. However, when people are thinking deeply, writing down their ideas, and presenting them, better collaboration and work result. No meetings required. I think there's nothing I can add to this. It's pretty much self-contained. Let me see. Yeah, it's like documentation is hard, but it's critical, especially as the trend continues towards more and more remote. And being remote, as in being in an office should not be the crutch for a lack of documentation. But it's just like this reinforces the importance of documentation again. That in person or not, documentation and documentation will slow down communication. It will slow down delivery. It will slow down all your processes. But in the long term, this is what makes a difference. Anyway, like I think I'm going too much on a sidetrack. Let's move on. The infinite game. Infinite minded leaders actively seek out employees, customers, and investors who share a passion for the just cause. For employees, this is what we mean when we say hire for culture and you can always teach the skills later. For customers and investors, this is the root of love and loyalty for the organization itself. I think it's a typo, maybe. So, talking about just cause, and the book, of course, goes deeply into the idea of just cause. So, I don't really think I can do it justice over here. Just cause refers to the idea of a mission or an objective that is just. It's not like, okay, it's not a finite minded objective that, okay, this much revenue growth or this much profitability or whatever. It is an infinite minded cause, and it is just, so just in terms of justice. So yeah, like I said, it's a heavily, the book elaborates significantly on the just cause. So if you've not read this, please do. I'll put a link in the description. For now, let's move on. Anthro-Vision. However, it is precisely because it is hard for elites to flip the lens that it is important to do so. Right, and elites refers to elites in all spheres. In an organization, it refers to executives, senior management, and it's an isolated highlight. But again, it is very very self-contained. That, you know, it is very hard to flip the lens. It's very hard to get another perspective to look at things. But because it is hard, it is even more important to do this deliberately. Let's move on. Range. New collaborations allow creators to take ideas that are conventions in one area and bring them into a new area, where they're suddenly seen and where they are suddenly seen as invention, said sociologist Brian Uzi, Amarel's collaborator. I hope I pronounced all the names correctly. Human creativity, he said, is basically an import-export business of ideas. Right, and this continues the trend of, being the generic, like, the importance of generalization and studying different areas so that you can actually cross pollinate ideas between them. So to take ideas that are conventional in one area, it's a conventional thing in one area, but then in another area it's actually an invention, it's a new thing. So it routinely happens, like the highlight also implies. I think it's not really saying that, but it implies that this happens all the time. Something that's so common in one place, it's actually seen as a radically new thing in a different place. By the way, Anthro-Vision, like the highlight we just saw earlier, it kind of refers to that. Flip the lens and getting a different perspective. It may be such a radical thing, but yeah, it's important for that reason. Anyway, let's move on. Working backwards. It takes almost no time to spot the superstars and to weed out the duds, but the majority of candidates, alas, falls somewhere in the between. And that is when biases tend to kick in. If you just pick people who have known characteristics, who already feel familiar, they seem likely to work out. The fact that they sometimes do succeed only makes matters worse, as it reinforces the notion that your process is good enough. I think this is self contained, but I'll just pause for a moment so that it can be digested. I think it's very important to understand our own biases in whatever we do. This is, of course, talks about recruitment, but in whatever we do, we are biased. There is no question of, okay, how much bias are we biased or not. We are. It's like, how do we handle it? And one way to handle it is reminding ourselves that we are biased. Anyway, yeah, let's move on. The voltage effect. You never know where the pot of gold lies, which is why curiosity and experimentation, rather than defensiveness, must be part of your cultural DNA. But once you find weak spots, correcting your course by reallocating your spending or restructuring your job functions may not be the only challenge you face. I think I've kind of lost the context. There is, of course, I mean, it is pretty clear, but there is an implied that, okay, there are other challenges, and I'm not really remembering that. I'll move on. The science of overcoming procrastination. The satisficer is just shooting to be satisfied and is looking for an option that suffices for their purposes. They want something that works well enough to make them satisfied and pleased, but not overjoyed or ecstatic. They aim for good enough and stop once they find that. Again, I don't think there's much for me to say here. And that brings us to the end of the highlights. So, well, I think that's it for today. And have a good rest of the week. Have a good rest of the month. I'll probably see you again, like I said, towards the end of January. I'm not committing to a return date yet, just yet. Let me see what works out. But yeah, have a good time, all of you.